Hello and welcome to another Coach Talk by Jeff Melcher from Cycling Form and Fitness. I have my contact information on this page. Best to actually try to contact me through Facebook or by email. My email is melcherj@hotmail.com. That's MELCHERJ at hotmail.com. So without any further ado, let's move forward through this presentation. A new development that many of my coach athletes are using is Training Peaks Virtual. Relatively new, used to be Indio Velo. Now Training Peaks has taken over that platform, and it's really quite a useful tool, especially with the Training Peaks modifications and additions that have been done in the last couple months. So what I'm going to do is to have you first go to your profile if you've been using this tool and understand that there's something called critical power that might be good for insights. And then I'll contrast that with Aerotune Power Testing. So again, when you open up your profile, you'll be able to select critical power. Let's do that, and they'll bring this screen up. I have my 20 minutes selected because that's where my critical power is defined as 265 watts. The estimated FTP from that is 252 watts. The reason being is critical power is typically about 30 minutes long, but it could be as short as 20 minutes long, 18 minutes long. It's going to be your highest output in that 12 to 30 minute range typically. The algorithm behind this has to pick what critical power to use based on your max efforts over time. So for me, it picked 265 at 20 minutes, estimated my FTP at 252, estimated my anaerobic engine, W prime, at 14.4 kilojoules, my VO2 max at 60 milliliters per kg per minute, and it has a confidence level of 88%. It also explains that these metrics are based on my best efforts between 3 to 20 minutes long. So I guess for this model, it's probably using 20 minutes max for critical power. And it does say that for this graph to be more useful in the critical power model to be better, I should do a personal best effort, and it should bring my 330 watt at 3 minutes to 345 at least. So all interesting things. Very useful data if you're trying to understand your anaerobic strength, which is going to be your W prime, the 14.4 kilojoules, versus more of your aerobic strength, your VO2 max in combination with your CP and your FTP. So you can look at this over time and see how it develops. The challenge that we have with this critical power model is it's updated. It's based on the last 90 days, but you don't have the ability to pick like a 90-day window to see if you're improving. Say if it's month after month, or if you want to compare 90 days from 2025 to 2024, we just don't have them. I have that in WKO5. That's a different software, but it's very similar for this model, and I can use that for customers as needed. So the W prime is that area under the curve for the critical power. So it looks at the critical power line. For me, that's 265. And it's looking at that area under the curve. And the curve is established by points that are best efforts between 3 to 20 minutes. So again, if you haven't done best efforts at these various intensities, the model doesn't work very well. It's only as good as the inputs. So ideally you have 3 tests, your best 3 minute, your best 5 minute, and your best 12 minute. Could be 3 minute, 5 minute, and 20 minute. But it takes 3 points at least of your very best efforts done on separate days, independent tests, well warmed up, well fueled, to create this curve and to have the model be accurate. What you can also do in contrast with that is the Aerotune Power Test. This can be done as a 2-day test or a 1-day test. This particular test I did a couple of days ago, and I did it as a 1-day test. I broke the two tests down into kind of a morning afternoon. In the morning, I did the seated sprint, which is looking at the best 5 seconds you can produce seated. And that's the 760 watts on this line graph. And then it's also looking for, in the ramp test, what was my best 6 minutes, and that's the 380 watts. And then I took my break and did a time trial in the afternoon. And that could be 12 to 40 minutes. You just have to pace it as hard as you can and at least get to 12 minutes. And if you have energy, you can keep going. I was pretty much low on energy, so I made it 14 minutes, not 20, not 30. And so 14 minutes, I have this 283 watts. It uses that data plus your body weight, your body fat, your height, to come up with a VO2 max, a VLA max, critical power, and a fat max. And again, if you're a coached athlete or you're working with me on an Aerotune test, you certainly will understand what these mean, and we'll talk through about what needs to be improved and what maybe even needs to come down a little bit because this is a scale. You got anaerobic side of your energy systems, that's measured by VLA max, and you got the aerobic side, your VO2 max, your critical power, and then your ability to sustain that like in a zone 2, that would be your fat max. So these are 4 key data points that are worth knowing to understand your current reality and how best to train. It's also useful if we move to the right for understanding what your maximum power is over durations, and then what type of feeling, so what carbohydrate ingestion do you need if you want to create the most power. Now, again, this isn't perfect. For some people, you might only be able to digest 60 grams per hour. Other people might be doing 90 grams per hour. This is based on my test, my power output. So if we're doing a 70.3 and we're saying, well, it's a zone 3 effort, low zone 3 across the bike and the run, let's just say that that's going to be probably about the 220 watts. That's a good bike for me for the time, and you can extrapolate that to the run. Well, here's the difference. So for 5 hours, 30 grams will produce about 217 watts. If I do no nutrition, 186 watts, so I'm just drinking water, maybe electrolytes. If I up that to 60 grams per hour, I can expect 234, so that's 17 watts higher. And if I go to 90 grams, I'm going to supposedly, per the model, get another 11 watts, and that's 245. So those are maximums, but it gives you an idea just how important it is to figure out how much fuel you can digest comfortably in 70.3 triathlon for this example, and how that impacts your output. And this is all personalized based on my test data. There's 6 pages to this report. I just want to hit a couple more conclusions that could be made. If I wanted to look at where my feeling is being used, so what's being burned at different wattages, I could look at that 220 watts and I could see 71 grams of carbs per hour. And so again, I won't keep up to that necessarily, 71 grams that is, but I certainly can ingest 50 or 60 grams. And then fats, fueling 55 grams, and then protein is 10 grams. So where we get this feeling from is highly impacted by our fat max and our training over long distances. So we can shift this quite a bit over time by improving our fat max. So I know in my own story, I used to be about 90 grams per hour at 220 watts, and now I'm 71 for the carb burning. That's nice, right? Because now I can digest less carbohydrates. I don't have to stress my system. and I can make it to the end of the race and be in decent shape. You never want to bonk before you get to the end of your race. Aerotune also gives me power by training zones. They break it up into 9. It gives me a heart rate for those zones, and it also gives me an indicator of the carbs versus the fats I'm burning for those zones. It goes one step further. They project if I have 7 hours to train on my bike, remember I'm a triathlete, so I got to run, bike, swim, how I should break down that training if I'm just doing base miles or if I'm doing base miles plus fat max training. If I'm doing base training plus more of a tempo, sweet spot, um, maximum lactate steady state, so low zone 4, my threshold, so zone 4, and then zone 5. So you also get what type of training breakdown you should do given which phase or which system you're trying to improve. If you want to think of these as training zones as different systems. In the reality, it's not quite that discrete. Your training impact ends up being a little bit more like a dimmer switch. So you got the aerobic dimmer switch, you got the anaerobic dimmer switch. Your aerobic is starting at base, and that's heavily used, and it goes down as we progress towards our anaerobic, and then we're tuning up that anaerobic once we go over our FTP. So it's always an aerobic and anaerobic balance, and that really plays out in how we can interpret this data. So that's what I have for you today. Obviously, you can reach out to me at Cycling Form and Fitness if you ever want to do an Aerotune test. I think it is best done with the coach so you can kind of get the best of this and know how to train going forward and understand what these different graphs and indicators mean for you. And I would be glad to do that, whether you're being coached by me or if you just want to deal with me remotely or if you want to come into CFF and test here. These are all fine options. So thanks. Appreciate your time. Train smart.